Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another AMA with Holochain and Holo. This is AMA number 25. It's April 11th, at least in parts of the world still. Today, we're going to be doing a little bit different focus than the previous handful of AMA events. But let's start with some structure. We're going to do some intros, some thank yous, some announcements and updates, some FAQs, and then we're going to get into your live questions. Today we've got myself, Matthew Schutte, the Director of Communications. We have David Atkinson, our Commercial Director for Holo. We have Eric Harris-Braun, the co-founder of Holochain, and he is heading up our Holochain core team. And we also have with us Eric Baer, the Community Manager. Some thank yous. Once again, we'd like to thank our collaborators, contributors, supporters, community builders, partners, and app/platform creators who all share the vision of a more distributed internet. Special thanks to those who are writing, reviewing, and/or creating developer and community resources to increase engagement and awareness. We encourage you to learn about Holochain. Check out developer.holochain.org, where the resources are available to help you build your first Holochain app. Some announcements. We've got some exciting events and meetups scheduled for the second quarter of 2019. We have so many of them that we're not going to dive into all of the dates, and not all of the dates are nailed down, but we're looking to have events and meetups in Barcelona, Perth, Melbourne, Australia, New York City, Sydney, Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, Istanbul, London, and Venezuela. David, can you go ahead and give us a little bit of an intro?
Sure thing. Thanks, Matt. The last few weeks, we've been talking a lot about Holo, Holo ports, and the Holo fuel. Both in the AMAs and the recent leadership and organization posts. And what we haven't talked so much about is the progress the Holochain core team has been making. Oh, excuse me, everyone, 1 second. You're gonna have to go downstairs. Thank you. There you go. I thought my children have just interrupted me. I thought it was gonna be a time where I could be on mute, but there you go. Beauty of life. He's lost his little pig that he got as a gift this morning, and he came up here to find it. So let me go back to what I was sharing. So the Holochain core team has been making really rapid strides towards a stable beta of Holochain. The progress is absolutely essential, as it means the closer we get to this stable beta, the more people can build the kind of solutions on Holochain that the community has been talking about for the last year. We've been tracking the weekly progress through the Holochain Dev Pulse that I know you're all reading. We thought today's a really good opportunity to have a look at what the dev team has been building. And we coaxed out of a period of not being involved in so many public communications, Eric Harris-Braun, one of the co-founders and visionaries, not just of Holochain, but of Scepter. We thought it'd be perfect to have him talk through both some of the progress, but also some of the bigger visions of Holochain and the world that he's been imagining over the last little while. So a nice change up to be able to focus on Holochain today, and we're really excited about where things are and what people are starting to build.
And with that, we'll dive into some of the questions. So the first one is, what's the difference between Holochain and Holo? So I'll start with, I'll try to take this one on. So what is Holochain? Holochain is a framework that enables people to build and run peer-to-peer applications, meaning applications that operate using just the devices of the users themselves. So that means that anyone who wants to run something like Facebook or Twitter or Airbnb or any other sort of social application they're able to do so without having to have a company in the middle. Holochain is free, it's open source, you don't have to pay for it, there's no mining involved, there's no web servers required. All you need is your phone or laptop or desktop, and you can participate in that application. You get to make use of it, but you're also generating it. Your device is doing the little bit of work required to make that application run for you and the rest of that community. Holo is a little different. Holo is a distributed hosting platform that enables people to use a Holochain app, to access a Holochain application without necessarily having to run that application locally. It enables them to access it using any web browser. Holo is essentially a peer-to-peer web hosting marketplace that enables anyone to interact with Holochain apps. It has, as a marketplace, it actually has a business model. There, people pay for the web hosting that certain members of the community provide that gives these folks with a browser access to the applications. And it also is the method by which we are subsidizing the larger Holochain project. Holochain does not have a business model. We're not making money on Holochain. It's something we're giving away to the world for free. But Holo has a currency feature, Holo Fuel, for those of you who are familiar. And when people make payments in Holo Fuel, we have a small transaction fee. It's 1% or less, which is less than transaction fees for just about any other kind of payment system. But that's not just covering the cost of payment processing. That's actually covering the entire business of setting up this peer-to-peer web hosting marketplace and providing those services. Anybody else want to add anything on top of that? Doesn't sound like it. All right, so moving on. David, I've given a little bit of an overview of what Holochain is. Can you help people with the next question, which is, what problem does Holochain solve?
Yeah, I mean, this is jumping into this question. There's so many different ways of looking at it. So, firstly, I'd say that Holochain we see is the application framework protocol for people who are looking to build applications where current systems need their trust extended, or where they're looking for sort of decentralized governance and decentralized technical architecture. To try and move a little bit away from jargon here, that may be the case for developers, where the combination of an open source environment and a broad developer community that find the framework easy to build on, with the no currency, just like Matt described, allows them to build applications that allow people to organize and communicate and coordinate in ways that they can't currently today. So the kind of applications that we think are possible on Holochain and the kind of problems they solve are applications where things change. So that is like in the world of supply chain, we talk about a lot, where the system that we're trying to build today may be different in 6 months' time, maybe different in 12 months' time. Different actors come in, different regulations are applied, and you need to be able to build computing systems and both social solutions as well that allow for that evolvability. That's one way of looking at it. Another way is, in the traditional model, you need to be able to control everything around your computing infrastructure. So we talk about a company and data centers, and you can't really extend that trust. So then you have to control your entire world. Then you have this idea of blockchain, and it's moved into this idea of trustlessness. And we haven't really got an ability to grow and extend trust. So Holochain is perfect when you want to be able to add new actors or new participants into the network and be able to extend trust, so that as your user base grows, your ability to create and coordinate across grows. Tried to give a couple of sort of broader brush examples. If you're thinking about this from a blockchain context, Holochain is more configurable, scalable, evolvable, and secure. So we like to think that the kind of solutions you can build on a blockchain are all better on a Holochain. And the simplest way to describe this is, you could really use Holochain to build any kind of blockchain platform or dApp that you can imagine. And I talk a little bit about this on the leadership post last week. I think the most interesting part of this question, what problems does Holochain really solve, actually Matt touched on a little bit in his talk at South by Southwest a few weeks ago, where he was looking at the VUCA, or like let's say the ever-adapting, fast-paced, changeable, uncertain world, and talked about why Holochain is perfect in that new environment. So Matt, you give a little bit more color to this.
Sure. For folks who've been following us for a while, they'll often hear us talk about a couple of things: agent-centric architecture, as well as a concept of mutual sovereignty. And the basic idea with these two things is, one, we're building applications and architecture from the perspective, or taking into account the perspective of each participant, right? So I'm choosing to participate in this application. David's choosing to participate in this application. We're deciding, yep, we want to run this together, and we're recording things according to our own perspective. Great, that's a useful piece. Two, all that's needed for us to work with one another in this way, to speak in that particular way, whether it's 140 character text messages or rideshare requests, is that David and I want to communicate in that way. If at some point David wants to try something else, in addition to this, he wants to use an additional app, he can. And if he wants to, he can bridge between the two. That capacity for any of us, individually or in collaboration with others, to try new things, to begin communicating and coordinating in new ways, essentially makes for more fluid communities. It enables our communication flows to be able to adapt and evolve in response to the contexts we face, whether those are new inventions showing up, a new security threat, or a flood that happened in our neighborhood, right? Any kind of new event in the world can be responded to without having to go through some significant bureaucratic process, right? We didn't have to have everybody in the community come into agreement. If David and I want to try it, that's good enough. But it also doesn't require us to come up with a business model. We don't have to figure out how to extract value out of that communication in order to be able to afford the web servers. If it works for David and it works for me, that intrinsic value is sufficient for us to run the application, right? We're bearing our own weight, essentially, in running this thing. So that shift, the getting rid of the bureaucracy of having to have everybody on the same page before anything gets tried, and the not having to have a business model in the middle. That doesn't mean you can't have. You totally can put business models in the middle. It just means you don't have to in order to try something. That accelerates our ability to experiment with new ways of communicating, new ways of coordinating. And through processes of trial and error, we will find better things. And so there's a significant adaptive capacity advantage that Holochain enables. And from my perspective, that's the primary driver and what gets me excited here. But our next question is, it kind of dives into opening this up for Eric more specifically. So I'll dive into that next. Alex asks of Eric, what's your background and what is the driving force behind the creation of Holochain? Eric?
Well, I love that question. This is at Alex from Twitter, and I think I'm going to, what I like about it is it feels like a really good journalist question because it tries to get at motivation from a background perspective. So I'm taking the bait completely. And my background is in, well, for one, when I was a kid, I was the kid who had to push the buttons on the elevators. Right, so for me, I've been in this thing of using computers for a long time. I had a Kim 1, I got a degree in computer science, and I've been thinking in terms of software systems and solving problems with computers forever. That's part of my background. And another part of my background is making things happen and entrepreneurship. So I've started companies. I did so straight out of college. I started a school. I've been part of nonprofits. And so there's this combination of the make things happen with software, embodied information processing and make things happen in the social realm. That is what I would say is the background that drives me. To answer the question that comes right after that in the very same sentence is, what is your background and what's the driving force behind the creation of Holochain? Well, the driving force behind the creation of Holochain is the possibility of increasing our collective intelligence on this planet as humans. My own experience of living on the planet and living in the society that we live in is that we are mostly collectively quite stupid in ways that are painful to us. And that's really sad, because in fact, it's like we do such amazing things. We can get people to the moon. We can extract all of this stuff out of deep wells in the ground and turn them into plastic that's like beautiful, it's fabulous, but then we throw it in the trash and it goes into the ocean, and it's just so sad. And then there's so much pain and suffering that it seems like we ought to be able to embody much stronger collective intelligence. So that background of paying attention to embodied systems that create flows of activity, which is what software systems end up doing, and my desire to build and participate in social systems that are lovely, inspiring to be part of, that's the driving force behind the creation of Holochain.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Eric. Our next question is related, and it's for Eric again. Also from @Alex. Eric, what's your ultimate vision for Holochain? Why is Holochain so important?
So that's like asking, what's the ultimate vision for English or any language? It's a great question, right? But the thing is, there is no ultimate vision for an expressive capacity. The ultimate vision for any expressive capacity is the expressions that we create together. And those things are mysterious to us right now. So I'm going to jump in a little bit in a sideways way. So why is Holochain so important? Is because it is an expressive capacity, which means it's a way in which we can share together that has a different pattern than many of the expressive capacities that we've been using on the planet in terms of software systems for a while. So one of the terms that we've used, and you may have seen this come across the wire, is that we're trying to create an unenclosable carrier, right? And this is what distributed systems do. And there's a way in which that's exactly what blockchain and Ethereum, all the blockchain solutions do. There's a carrier that can hold the transactions that we are sharing together that's unenclosable, and it happens by virtue of the parties who want to play it together. A simple expression of an unenclosable carrier is air. When a group of people get together in a room and they express together, air is unenclosable. You can't snatch somebody's words out of the air. The carrier that we're on right now is quite enclosable because there's all of these centralized components that even though people think of the internet as decentralized, there's only a few parts of it that are actually fully decentralized. And so what's so important about Holochain is creating an embodiment of an unenclosable carrier, because the kinds of things that happen in an unenclosable carrier are substantially different than the kinds of things that happen on enclosable carriers. I'm leaving that as a teaser for you to think about. And that's also, I mean, I could have answered that as my question of what's the driving force behind the creation of Holochain. Well, it's to create an unenclosable carrier because of what's possible on that kind of a substratum. And what the systemic difference is when you build your communications on an unenclosable carrier than when it's on an enclosable carrier. It's like, what's the difference between when you build your transportation infrastructure using internal combustion engines versus electric engines? Big difference. Systemic differences arise quite differently depending on what the pull is that comes from those technological choices. Same here.
Thanks, Eric. All right, next up, the other Eric on the call, Eric Bear, who those of you who've been to some of our events may just know as Bear. This question is, Eric Bear, what are you doing at Holochain? Why are you here?
I'm helping to grow our ecosystem. I hold space for in-person events, a lot of in-person events, and for our event strategy, and for the experiences like when people actually gather in person and connect with each other around this technology. And what I guess what I do is work to is work to continue to grow the experiences that people attend, whether it's a dev dinner, a meetup, a hackathon, an intensive, a dev camp. We're going to start doing online meetups soon. That when anyone's connecting in a space that we're holding or that people are holding around Holochain, that the experience feels different from normal crypto technology spaces, and that our community has a culture that embodies some of the core principles and values that underlie the technology that we're sharing, so that we're learning about it in ways that feel like they're an integrity or an increasing integrity with what it is we're actually trying to create differently in the world, if that makes sense.
Eric, can you share a little bit about what some of the you mentioned our events being different. How are they different? You've been to a bunch of these now. What do people say? What are the experiences they have that are different from let's say a traditional blockchain event?
Yeah, so one of the things that's really sparkly right off at the bat with that, comparing to a traditional blockchain event, is we just have terrible and almost no swag, which I love, because we're not trying really hard to get people to like us because we're giving away cool stuff or because we've got all these shiny placards and all of this stuff. We really want people to come because the technology is valuable. Like, we're making a tool that's useful enough on its own accord for people to come and be interested, and for people to share with each other, like, hey, I've got this really useful thing and I'm able to do this now with it. Would you like to use it? Yeah, I would like to use it. And to really foster more of those direct personal kinds of connections, rather than convince everyone of all the potential and all the greatness, that we're really wanting it to be really grounded in, this is a useful thing. I like it because of this, and I want to share it with you, as one-to-one as possible. Yeah. So we try to have it be messy and fun and creative that way.
In my experience, people come because they're excited about what they can build, but often they walk away from an event seeing new possibilities and excited about the community that they found. I think a large part of what we try to do is actually, in those events, is not solely tech focused, right? It really is, and I think Bear is underselling himself a bit here. He's a bit masterful in facilitating and designing experiences, as are a number of the other people in the org, including Eric and Arthur and others, that leave people feeling alive and excited to stay in contact with the other fellows that they met at that event. And they tend to walk away really excited about the change that they are going to be able to make in the world by themselves and with one another. And I don't typically see that. I see a lot more. I've been to a lot of blockchain events. And in the blockchain events, I see a lot of, man, we're going to get rich type of energy, and which is not evil, but it's a different energy than, wow, we're going to change the world. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead, DeBear.
Thanks. I was gonna say thank you and add to that it's, what we're doing is truly revolutionary. So if, like, as we do it and as it continues to get built and become more and more real, people's participating is rich just because they're a part of something that's really revolutionary. And the bonds that get created there are like you were saying, are more, I don't know, feel more meaningful and hopefully lasting.
Yeah, and it's the one last thing I will say, to not to belabor the point, but we have a small team, right? A big team relative to where we were a couple of years ago, but we're only 50 people, and we're not hoping to have a small impact. And so how we're growing this community is largely dependent on other people coming in and being really heavily engaged. We've got some amazing meetup organizers around the world who are stepping up and dedicating significant time and effort and thoughtfulness to how they're hosting and generating community. And Eric Bear plays a big role in trying to create coherence amongst those meetup organizers so that they can co-learn amongst one another, but also gain support in other ways. So thanks, Bear. All right, enough of that. Next up, this question is going to be for David from Twitter. This is Gay Jen Jung. Do you think Holochain is better suited for a decentralized research ecosystem like OpenScience.org than blockchain? We are currently building in Ethereum and IPFS, and then they shared the OpenScience white paper.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. I'm not going to go into the specifics around research solutions and jump into the specifics of the white paper shared. I do encourage you that if you would like to talk to the team about adapting the solution to Holochain, then please get in touch so we can support you with the architecture and especially support you as you begin to start building. More broadly, I touched on earlier, like Holochain versus how you're thinking about a blockchain solution. So we'd say that it's way more configurable, scalable, evolvable, and secure. Some of the ways really not even in our language that we might describe this is that you're able to build solutions that don't force you to make this trade-off between a private and a public chain so that your solution can grow and your membranes or users and how they use your solution can change over time. The scalability of transactions in the Holochain agent-centric design is it's a different proposition to the way you're thinking about scalability in a blockchain solution. You know, our version of smart contract are editable and evolvable and changeable rather than getting something perfect one time. Holochain works in offline mode, which could be fantastic for the research world. No longer does every computer have to be connected at all times. You know, it's self-sovereign. There's cross-application connectivity. You can be bridging all sorts of other applications that would rely on your data or rely on working with your users, or could extend the solutions that you want to build with additional applications easily. The functionality of Holochain all exists in the application, not in the protocol. So you're not having to accept our design choices into the applications and solutions you're trying to build. Our design choices are you should build the application that you want to build in a way that works in a distributed environment. And then there's modularity and microservices and the security of the Holochain application framework are some of the other benefits. I wrote a little bit about this last week, so please go to our Medium and check out the blog post. Please get in touch with the team to talk more about the architecture.
Okay, next question. Eric Bear. We recently did an intensive, which is a different kind of event than we've done previously, in Australia. Can you tell us a little bit more about that recent Holochain intensive and what is the purpose of an intensive more generally?
Yeah, it was totally wonderful. So we did our very first ever Holochain intensive at Peregrine Beach in the Sunshine Coast in Australia, because Australia is really punching above its weight in the Holochain ecosystem. We've got a number of relatively mature projects happening in Australia or that are based there. We had Project Fly-In, Hilo came in with their core team from Portland to join us, and it was really an opportunity and we've also got some really strong community organizers in Australia who are just doing beautiful work, having meetups and running local hackathons and all sorts of events. So we all just came together to coordinate around shared projects so that people were offering whatever learning and tools they have for whatever they're doing, whether community building or specific projects, for sharing different accounting systems, and then for the specific projects that are actually building their code on Holochain to share which different features each one's building that has overlap, so we're not doing redundant work, so that one team can build one piece and share it with 3 other ones. and vice versa. And we had just really great connections, really great mapping and cross-fertilization. We played Frisbee on the beach. There were parrots. We ate really well, really. It was really wonderful. And it's like the furthest stage in our event series. And it's one with its application and invitation only for people that are already really in with Holochain, so we can come together and go real far, real fast.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bear.
Yeah.
All right. The next one is for Eric Harris-Braun again. This is from @DecentralAvery. What's your vision for Scepter?
Okay. The Scepter questions. Okay. I think I am also seeing that this is a 3-part question, and I think I'm going to mix them all together because it makes sense to go into that. Okay, so what's my vision for Scepter? It feels like that's a little bit out of the blue because we're talking about Holochain here, and I think there's a little bit of a background that's needed to talk about this, which is why is somebody even asking that? The Holochain project came out of the work that we had been calling Scepter earlier, Arthur and I and other folks who've been working on that, Fernanda, yourself, Jean-François Noubel, and it relates to what I said when I was asking about when I was answering about the question of where does this come from, about being able to create collective intelligence, having new patterns for collective intelligence. So the Scepter, the notions behind Scepter was what kind of a compute fabric do you need in the end to really get there? So my vision for Scepter includes the things that I was talking about around an unenclosable carrier, and Holochain is one part of that. It's one part of what's needed to really get to deep collective intelligence for us. There are other parts of that that are necessary, I think, that are not included in Holochain because it's just too big a vision. It's too hard to figure out how to make that happen. And so those include things like having a protocol for protocols. And what that means is that when we're doing collective intelligence together and we have some kind of a substrate in which we can represent the patterns that we're playing by, the games that we're playing by as collective organisms, things like, what is a law? A law is a pattern that we play by. What is as an example, what are grades that we use in sharing information about an individual's progress through an education system? These are patterns and rules and games that we play by. The vision behind Scepter is taking that capacity to do that kind of thing to the next level, and it requires a bunch of technical substrates underneath it to make it happen. So what's the vision for Scepter? The vision for Scepter is pulling that stuff together, of which Holochain is one piece of the necessary components to make that all happen. There's not enough time in this call to really go fully into the depth of that, but I can share a little bit more if that seems appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, well, maybe the next question will surface some of the more. What's the link between Scepter, Holochain, Holo, and the Metacurrency project?
Okay, so I'm going to also jump back to my story, my background in coming into this. A number of years back, I was on the board of directors of a small not-for-profit called the E.F. Schumacher Society, which was a not-for-profit, a think and do tank that was stewarding some of the thinking that's been happening for a long time around decentralized economics. So decentralizing economics is an old pattern. It's been around for a long time. And part of that work was working on local currencies. And I got very interested in that. And that's actually how Arthur Brock and I met up, is thinking about different patterns around local currencies and currency, our monetary system, as one of the kind of games we play, and the limits of the collective intelligence that we can have together if we play by the patterns that we're currently playing by. So out of that work came this thing that we call the Metacurrency Project, and then we were looking for what's the compute fabric that's necessary to be able to represent new patterns, new forms of creating formal information token systems that allow us to make rule sets and play games together. And that was what the Metacurrency Project was holding, which spun out Scepter. And Holochain is a small part of that, and Holo is a way of activating that in the world in a real way. Where the world is now, right? Where we are right now, because you have to go from a vision of something that might happen from where the world is right now. The idea that if you build it, they will come, you actually have to build what we need now, right? You can't build whatever. There has to be a bridge from the current world to the next world. So the link between these is a strategic path to trying to do something that seems really crucial and important in the world for me.
Wonderful. I'll try to add a little bit of color. And I heard the audio cut out at a couple of key points, so I want to fill in the gaps. One of the things, the name of that project was the Metacurrency Project. Scepter came out of the Metacurrency Project. Holochain is basically a part of Scepter, right? And Holo is a thing that makes it so that Holochain can get adopted far more readily. That's kind of a basic gist of it. It makes it so that people don't have to choose to be early geeky tech folks right away just to make use of a Holochain app. All they have to do is type in a URL in any browser. And so it's really a strategy around, okay, what are the stepping stones that we can lay down that will not only help people move forward, but help us build community, because we don't want to try to build all this ourselves. We don't have the capacity to build an entire ecosystem of interacting applications ourselves. We need a whole world filled with people doing that. And so it's sort of, how do you get started, basically? All right. I've got somebody shooting photos at my house, so that's what you're seeing in the background here. We're trying to sell a home. Next up, this is another question on that, along those same lines, but hopefully a little simpler. Eric, what's the link between Scepter and the semantic web?
So one of the components of Scepter is, we realized in doing this, if you want to create this kind of compute fabric, what's really important is to be able to represent meaning. And so if you've been diving into the Scepter website, you will see that part of our notions of how to go about doing this is to put semantics at the core of the compute fabric. So we prototyped some stuff around semantic trees and actually having the actual words, the instructions of the CPU be at the level of meaning that you can't actually represent, for example, an integer in the system. There's no such thing as an integer. There's only things that have meaning, like shoe sizes or like when you're creating a number, you can't just have a raw number in there. You have to be talking about the context by which what it means. So you can't even have a latitude or a longitude. You have to have a home location or something like that. Like you hold together the concept of structure and meaning together. And so we put that into the base of the compute fabric that Scepter will be using. And that reaches to the relationship. The semantic web is also trying to really create powerful ways of talking about meaning. The difference is that we put that at the bottom of the stack. The semantic web, the semantics is all the way at the top of the stack, on top of all the different protocols. In Scepter, you start with semantics at in your computation. The CPU literally runs on meaningful representational representations of structure that carry meaning at that lowest level. And so they're both like approaches. We think you have to put it at the bottom instead of the top.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eric. Okay, next up. This one is for Eric Baer. What is the experience you are trying to create at a Holochain meetup?
Relevant and engaging. So we did one in New York last week that was my favorite meetup that I've attended so far, because there was almost no time presenting to the whole group about Holochain. We really quickly just split the whole group up because we had enough people that had attended hackathons and dev camps who were part of the local community there. So the community's in an advanced stage that, and then we just split off into all of these different groups having relevant conversations about the pieces that they wanted to talk about at all sorts of different levels and with different interests. So there are people talking philosophy underneath it. There are people understanding the holo fuel ecosystem and the distinction between holo and holochain, different levels of technicality for different developer group conversations, people that are just beginning to understand how holochain works, and all of it was happening concurrently, and lots of side conversations to that with people making meaningful connections with each other. And it was just a beautiful experience with lots and lots more questions being asked, lots and lots more questions being answered by a bigger group of people than just the one to all. So it was a really, really rich experience, I think. And we've got a long way to go still, but that's what I'm going to cultivate. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Bear. Next up, this is a question from Holochain Citizen on Reddit. And they say, I have a question for Eric Harris-Braun. Do you have any comments on the Scribe project? And they share a link to a visual overview, which is aiming to build on Holochain in terms of where this sort of initiative might compare, contrast, or fit in with future plans for Scepter. To summarize briefly, the Scribe project aims to build a conceptionary, like a dictionary for concepts, to help facilitate ontology design.
Yeah, that's a lovely question. Thank you, Holochain Citizen. I've taken a quick look at the visual pitch, the link that was shared. So it's really cool, actually. I like this notion of a conceptionary. I think what it's doing is it's pointing to precisely the foundational nature of having in our digital lives semantics and how important that's going to be, right? And so I like the distinction that you're making here between a conceptionary and a dictionary, where a dictionary is referential about terms, and a conceptionary is referential about not about terms but about concepts. So to me, the point is there's a huge room to play. I'm excited that you want to build this on top of Holochain. I don't know how it's all going to play out as we get to the place where we can build out Scepter and we can flesh out the different pieces of actually creating semantic trees for our compute fabric. And I know for sure that we're going to have multiple reference for meaning, that there is no one size fits all for meaning, that we're going to have to do all kinds of stuff like that. So I'm excited to see people like yourself playing and thinking about the importance of this, moving it into Holochain, and we'll get to see where it shows up and how it ends up playing in when Scepter comes along and can use the unenclosable carrier that we create on Holochain to then get to different places.
Thank you, Eric. The next question from Reddit, Hash Party asks, Holoports. Are people going to be disappointed when they don't actually do anything? David, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Matt. So just to remind you, I think from our perspective, the ports are the hardware that are part of the most advanced attempt we know to build a truly distributed internet and truly distributed hosting ecosystem that bridges people between the world we know it today and the world of the future. So just the shipping the ports with software is a huge achievement in itself. And what I think you're asking is, will people be disappointed when there's not an enormous demand for hosting and a massive amount of applications running on day one? First way of looking at this that we think about is, were people disappointed when they first ran the Bitcoin blockchain? Were people disappointed when they first ran the internet and they tried to ping someone and they were in mail app and none of their friends had email? Well, no. They were doing something that they saw immediately when they started playing, that they're doing something that was the complete way of the future, and they were the first there. And we don't know what people are going to do, but we know as a team we have this same level of excitement as some of the examples I shared. The next way we look at it is what we're promising to deliver at that time that you described as a series of distributed applications that are already a sum of most of the blockchain projects out there that raise money through ICOs in 2017, 2018. So again, if there's the demand for these kind of applications, the size of the demand that we think there is, that people are going to be pretty excited when they can start to run some of these applications. The next way of looking at this is, well, we've got wave of alpha releases, and we've been talking to you guys over previous AMAs and through our various communications through our Medium accounts. There's going to be a series of test phases over the next few months as we release various levels of the Holo network and applications and Holo Fuel. So I think the point that we're really talking about is when the network goes live, we believe there are already going to be demand for hosting and applications running on the network because of the conditions I've described so far. And finally, it's up to all of us. It's up to all of us on this AMA, you guys listening, the people Bear was talking about, connecting in various meetups around the world, building on the intensives, and people who get inspired from what we've been sharing, but more importantly, what they can build. And we think that as time technology gets into the hands of people who have been in the community so far, as the community grows, then there will be things that go massively mainstream because of the power of the technology and the promise of what can happen. And we think that will catalyze early adopters being incredibly proud and happy to be part of the ecosystem from the start.
Thank you, David. Next question is from Jay Vixen from Reddit. What's the duration of a transaction on Holochain? Eric, do you want to take this?
Sure. So the thing that's fun about that question is that there isn't a duration of a transaction on Holochain. There's no normative duration. And that's the strength. That's the power behind it. Because what is necessary if you want to build something that is actually scalable and responds and is appropriate to a particular use case, you have to be able to have different levels of validation and verification depending on the type of transaction. What is the duration of a transaction for selling a house versus buying a cup of coffee versus saying, thanks, Bob, for what you did, versus putting a star on a website? There should be different amounts of time that it takes to do those transactions, depending on how much time it takes to validate that transaction in the context of the particular social game that is being played. Right? So that's the reason that's the reason why there isn't a specific duration for a transaction. And furthermore, the Holochain as a platform, if you've got tons of transactions running at the same time, which you can do because there is no global consensus, you can agree on, I mean, in some senses, like that was a person-to-person transaction may take a long time. A transaction that requires verification with a large number of parties will take a long time, but you can have simultaneously those two happening at the same time. You could be buying and selling 50 houses at the same time as long as the parties involved aren't the same parties making records at the, simultaneously on their chains. Then you might have some kind of stacking delays. Where you would start to be asking computer sciencey question of throughput for that. If one party was involved in every single transaction, well, then you have a different answer to the question, how long is a particular transaction on Holochain? So really the correct question is, what is the duration of a transaction for a given Holochain application? And that will vary depending on the application, which it should vary on, because we're not doing global consensus.
I love that. I love the way in which that enables the users and developers of applications to come up with the right balances that are appropriate for their context. Balances of speed or cost or security or, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, next up. This is a more fun question. It's for Bear. Bear, why are you always barefoot? Is it safe to say that Eric Bear is behind the bare feet trend on hackathons? Sorry, I had to ask that. And by the way, I love it. That's so funny.
Thanks to whoever asked it. I'm really curious who that is and if it's someone that I've met. I really hope that I'm behind the trend of being barefoot at hackathons, and I think it's very likely. I am often barefoot because I feel a lot more comfortable that way. So I just kind of do it. That's basically it.
Because you wanna.
Because I wanna. Because I like it and I wanna.
Fair enough.
Also, while I've got the mic, I want to add something to the pieces that I was saying earlier about community and our community building. Is that one of the other reasons that people come is because our organizers, our community organizers, are just such wonderful, pragmatic, enthusiastic, and passionate people who hold really awesome spaces and are really excited. Everyone's got their own passion for what they see possible in the world with this technology, and it's so exciting to share from that place. Those are the kind of environments that are created, and it's not really because we are making that happen. It's really because we're working to make as much space as possible for people that have that motivation to come in and hold space for others, to share it, and to grow some reality based on those leading.
Awesome. Thank you, Bear. Next up, when will you release a Holochain wallet? And is it possible for a mobile device to become a micro holoport? Eric, do you want to answer this?
Sure, I'll take that. We're, by the way, Eric, Bear, and I are in the same location, and so we're switching off videos as a way of hopefully getting more bandwidth across, so we're a little less choppy. I understand that there's being some chop. Okay, so the answer is there's never going to be a Holochain wallet. Holochain is a system that is not based on a currency. Putting a currency in the middle is a huge mistake in our view. And in fact, actually, if you go back to the source, if you go back to some of the initial conversations around the internet and its design, there was a conversation that happened. I've been in the room with David P. Reed when he described how the people who were doing some of the initial designs of DARPANET were saying, but how is this going to be paid for? And he said, look, don't put the billing in the center. Put the billing at the edges. Right? And this was that whole notion of you push the intelligence to the edges and you make the center as dumb as possible. That's kind of what we're trying to do also with Holochain. And so there's no monetary or wallet type solution in the center of Holochain. There will never be one. Now, in terms of Holo, there will also not be a wallet with HoloFuel. And HoloFuel is a solution that has a currency in it. But the reason why there's no wallet is because what there is an account book, a ledger. There's a record of the transactions that have happened. And that's the magic of mutual credit, shifting your mindset from coins that go in a wallet that represent and in the digital world try to replicate this idea that there's material that you have to move from one place to the next, which is a physical world reality. Trying to reproduce that in the digital world for solving monetary problems, we think is a mistake. Instead, what you do, we believe, is to create account books. You replicate what happens in accounting to solve monetary solutions. That's what you should do in the information world, rather than trying to replicate what happens inside of wallets. So I try to answer that on two different levels, and both of them say never, and I'm just doing that to be a little provocative, but it's a great question. Thank you for asking it.
Awesome, thank you, Eric. Okay, next up. Is the model of deep wealth a kind of tool to help us figure out which flows are what kind of currencies within the ecosystem? That's kind of a awkwardly phrased question, but Eric, do you want to take a swipe at the relationship between what deep wealth and our visuals that we've created around that are intended?
Well, I really want to know who asked that question, because that sounds like a ringer. Somebody who's been reading our metacurrency websites and so on, and so I love it. Thank you for answering that. And it relates a little bit to the question that was just asked about a Holochain wallet. And the answer is yes. So the model of deep wealth that you would find if you went and looked at the Metacurrency website, what it tries to do is make obvious that when you're looking at value, there are different levels at which value occurs. And some of those levels include value that is movable, right? You can move it from one place in the world to another. So for example, a carrot is something that you can move from one place in the world to another place in the world. And so that tells you, the fact that it's movable, it means that you might want to have your accounting system match the properties of movability. Another thing that is valuable is a capacity that you might have as an individual, right? Which is teachable, but it's not movable. And so if you're going to try to create an information system to build and expand the value of capacities that individuals have, it probably ought not to have a mismatch with the actual nature of that value. And so the commoditization of people's capacities is something that decreases the overall value in the system, treating individual human capacity as if it were movable in the way that a carrot is movable and extractable and ownable. It doesn't work as well in creating overall value. And so, yes, if you want to dive into the living system models of wealth or the deep models of wealth, you can see some of the deeper answers to these questions about how we gain collective intelligence and what kind of formal information systems, therefore what kind of computing fabric, therefore Holochain is necessary to build the kinds of currencies that are around, and where we also get our design material and our design thinking about designing a mutual credit currency for Holo instead of just using a coin for Holo. So it's related, and I'm trying to grab those things and put them back into that context, that this isn't, we're not grabbing this stuff out of the blue. It's really about thinking about deep systemics of the world and how systems actually interoperate together to form healthy living systems.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again, Eric. All right, next up. If any government would want to stop your project, then what are you doing about that? David, you want to take a swipe at this?
Yeah, fantastic question. Where there's a few different angles. Again, like a lot of these questions, hopefully what it shows you guys in the community is that we've put a lot of thought over many years and a lot of intentional action to make sure we do things properly. And that was certainly the case in how we were fundraising. So all of you know we completed our ICO in April 2018, and we held ourselves to standards that weren't the norm across the industry at that time, but standards that we believed were better standards for building a community. So that's one way where we've tried to make sure that we've gone from principles and do things in a way that we believe are right and the best way to be able to raise money with community accountability. And we hope we've been successful, and we hope in terms of the community that you're appreciative of the efforts we've put in. At the same time, we know it's essential to work within the current framework. So we've been working, Mary's talked a few times about working with regulators based in Gibraltar to make sure that the operations of Holo are in accord with the regulatory environment. Also have put steps in place to make sure that Holochain, which is an open source project, is treated as any other open source project would be, and will operate in that way. And then outside the operating conditions of these different organizations, I think there's also implicit in this question, what are you doing around external threats? And part of that we've answered several times before is this idea that if someone's threatening you, then you're doing something right. We're having a big enough impact in the world that people don't like what we're doing, and that is part of both, I guess, the blessing and the challenge. And so we'll treat that with the appropriate actions at the time, and also with the respect that means that is being given to us. And so I guess that's part of what we expect will happen, and the mission for us and what we're preparing for.
Eric, do you want to comment a little bit as well?
Just one tiny thing, notwithstanding what David said, which is totally true, and I agree with it. The other thing is that I think one of the things that we're doing to work on this issue is that we actually come from a place that, for the most part, we're trying to solve the same problems governments are trying to solve. Governments want to take care of their citizens. That's by and large the case. And that's what we are trying to do as well. So the way I look at it is that I want to be in partnership with solving the hard problems. There may be barriers to solve them. There may be interests that will be overcome and so on. But essentially, it's from coming from that place of we're in this together.
Yeah,
that's what I'm doing about how to solve that problem.
And I want to add a little color there too, which is, yep, we're trying to make it so that governments, other people who are dealing with complex coordination problems, because that's really what governments are in the business of, that they look at what we're doing with Holochain, they go, oh wow, we need to use that. That's an asset that can help us lead to much richer flows of communication and coordination, not we need to squash that. So that's a primary thing. David, do you want to add anything at the end here?
Oh, I just wanted to thank everyone, and well, thank Eric, and hope you all enjoyed the Holochain flavor to this AMA. And at the same time, thought it was really important to also recognize there has been a lot of conversation around Holo and Holo ports in between the AMAs. And we had Mary post a couple of videos, and we've shared some photos of the ports in the production line. So we're keeping you guys all up to date with the Holo ports through video and through our communication channels. We're also keeping you up to date with Holo progress through our emerging clouds update. I'm sure there'll be more on both of those at the next AMA. Just thought with the progress of Holochain, it's a great opportunity to actually take stock and look at where we are and get a lot of these questions answered. And we want to make sure a big shout out to all of our various online volunteers who've been patiently answering all sorts of questions over the last few months and been incredibly supportive, educating different communities, bringing people up to speed, and also handling a lot of the questions around Holo and Holo ports over the last little while. So a huge shout out to all of you guys. Thank you very, very, very much. And I'll pass it over to you, Matt.
Actually, I'm going to ask Eric Bear to chime in a little bit, and then I'll wrap up.
Okay. I just want to invite anyone who's watching the AMA who's interested in holding community and in gathering people around for a dev dinner or for a meetup and eventually a hackathon to please reach out to us at events@holo.host. Thanks.
Wonderful. Yeah, events@holo.host. Ping that. You'll get a response probably from Bear. And we'd love to support you in building vibrant community in your local area. Again, everyone, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us for another AMA. Again, we've got Eric Bear, Eric Harris-Braun, David Atkinson, me, Matthew Schutte, as well as our other team members on the back end, Micah Jefferson, Amanda, which most of you will know as DHT Network. Thanks all. Take care. Enjoy. Bye.